The room was already paid for. I remember checking the confirmation twice, then a third time. 5-star resort, ocean view, anniversary package, everything I had never been able to give them growing up. But when I called the front desk that night, they said the reservation had been used, checked in, consumed, closed. I thought it was a mistake. I thought maybe my parents had arrived early and didn't tell me. But then the manager paused and asked a question that didn't belong in that conversation. "Sir, are you sure you gifted this stay to your parents?" That was the moment I understood. Something had already been taken from me, and it wasn't just the booking. I have always preferred things that can be accounted for. Numbers, confirmations, quiet systems that do not need emotion to function. If something is entered correctly, it produces the same result every time. There is no confusion in it, no shifting tone, no reinterpretation. I think that is why I built my life the way I did. Predictable work, predictable routine, predictable responsibilities. I wake up at the same time every morning. I check my emails before I leave the bed. I respond to anything that requires acknowledgement, even if the answer is only one line. I do not leave things open. I do not leave people waiting. By the time I leave for work, everything already feels processed. It has been like this for years. No one ever asked me to live this way, but it became necessary. Because growing up, nothing else was consistent. My parents were not unstable in any visible way. There were no loud arguments, no obvious absence. From the outside, everything looked intact. Inside, it was quieter than that. Conversations were short. Reactions were delayed or missing entirely. Achievements were acknowledged but never expanded on. Questions were answered but never followed by curiosity. I learned early that silence did not mean peace. It just meant nothing was being said. So I adapted. I stopped expecting responses that required emotion. I stopped offering details that would not be received. I learned how to exist without creating weight for other people. It made things easier, at least on the surface. Over time, I became the one who handled things. If a bill needed to be paid, I paid it. If something broke, I fixed it. If there was a form, a process, a requirement, I completed it before anyone asked. Not because I was told to. Because it felt safer to remove the possibility of something going wrong. My parents never resisted it. They let it happen gradually. At some point, it stopped being help and became expectation. Not spoken, just understood. Even then, I never saw it as something negative. It was just structure. And structure made everything quieter. Their anniversary was approaching, and I knew about it weeks in advance. They had never celebrated it in any visible way. No dinners, no trips. No traditions that marked the day as different from any other. It passed every year the same way everything else did, without attention. I noticed it because I noticed dates. Not out of sentiment, out of habit. Still, this time felt different. Not because they asked for anything. They did not. But because I had reached a point where I could finally do something that was not necessary. Something that did not fix a problem. Something that did not respond to a gap. Just something complete. I spent a few nights looking through options. Not quickly, not impulsively. Carefully, I compared locations, availability, reviews, terms. I did not look for something flashy. I looked for something quiet, contained, and precise. A place where everything worked the way it was supposed to. Where nothing needed to be managed. Where they would not have to think about logistics or timing or details. I chose a 5-star resort, ocean-facing, 3 nights, anniversary package included. Dinner reservations already set, transport arranged, no variables left open. I read through the confirmation multiple times before finalizing it. Names spelled correctly, dates aligned, payment processed, email received, everything complete. There is a certain kind of calm that comes from knowing nothing has been missed. I sent them the details the next morning. A simple message. No explanation attached to it, just the confirmation and the dates. I did not ask if they liked it. I did not wait for a reaction. I went to work. They responded a few hours later. Short message. Received. That was all. No questions, no comments, no indication of surprise. I read it once. Then I locked my phone and continued with the day. It did not feel unusual. That was how things had always been, acknowledgement without expansion. I did not need more than that, or at least I had learned not to. In the following days, I checked the booking twice. Not because I expected anything to be wrong, but because I always check. The system showed everything as confirmed, unchanged, stable, exactly as it should be. I remember thinking briefly that this was enough. Not the place, not the cost, just the fact that it had been done correctly, that nothing had been left incomplete, that for once something existed without needing adjustment. I did not expect anything from it. No reaction, no gratitude, no moment. Just a process that had been executed the way it was intended to be. And for me, that was already more than most things had ever been. I closed the tab and moved on to the next thing that needed to be handled. The first shift was small enough to ignore. It came a day after I sent the booking. My mother called in the afternoon, which was not unusual, but the timing was slightly off. She usually called in the evening after dinner when there was nothing left to do and no reason to continue the day. This time it was earlier. I answered on the second ring. She did not begin with a greeting, just my name said once as if she had already been speaking before the call connected. Then a pause. I waited. She asked about the dates, not in a general way, not when is it or which days. She asked for the exact check and time. I told her. Then she asked about check-out. I answered again. There was another pause, longer this time. I could hear something in the background. Movement, maybe a door closing, but it was distant, not clear enough to identify. Then she asked if the dates could be changed. The question came without context. I asked why. She said nothing for a moment, then gave a vague answer, something about just checking and in case something comes up. Her tone was neutral, but it felt measured, not uncertain, not confused, just controlled. I told her the booking was fixed, but modifications were possible depending on availability. She did not respond immediately. When she did, it was a quiet okay. Then the call ended shortly after. No follow-up. No comment about the place. No acknowledgement of what it was, just the information she needed. I did not think about it again until later that night. Not because it stayed with me, but because it did not. It should have. It was the first time they had asked anything specific about something I had arranged, and the focus had not been on the experience, only the structure around it. The next day, my father mentioned it, briefly. We were on the phone for something unrelated, a document he needed help with. He asked his questions, I answered them, and there was a moment at the end where the conversation usually closed. Instead, he added one more thing. He asked if the reservation was transferable. The word stood out. Transferable, not changeable, not adjustable. Transferable. I asked what he meant. He said, if someone else wanted to use it. There was no explanation attached to it, no hesitation, just the question placed plainly. I told him it depended on the resort policy, but generally identity verification would be required at check-in. He acknowledged it with a short response, then shifted the conversation back to the document, as if the question had not been significant, as if it had not introduced something that did not belong. After the call ended, I sat with the phone still in my hand, not thinking, just holding it. There are moments when something feels slightly misaligned, but not enough to be named. This was one of them, not a problem, not even a concern, just a detail that did not settle into place. I told myself it was nothing. They were asking out of curiosity or practicality, or maybe they did not fully understand how bookings worked. That had happened before. I had explained systems to them many times, payments, confirmations, processes that required exactness. It was not unusual for them to ask questions that seemed disconnected. So I placed this in the same category. Unfamiliarity, nothing more. A few days passed without any mention of the trip. No follow-up questions, no discussion of plans, no confirmation that they had arranged transport, even though it had already been included. Silence returned to its usual place, and that more than anything made it easier to ignore what had come before. If something was wrong, it would continue, it would expand. But this did not. It disappeared, or at least it appeared to. On the fourth day, I received an automated email from the resort, a standard notification. Your reservation details have been updated. There was no urgency in it, no alert, just information. I opened it without concern. The dates were the same. The room category unchanged. The package still included. At first glance, nothing had shifted. But there was a small addition at the bottom, a note about guest details confirmed. I read it twice, then a third time. The names listed were still my parents', spelled correctly, exactly as I had entered them. No new names, no visible modification, everything looked intact. I closed the email, then reopened it, not because I saw something wrong, but because something felt too complete. As if a process had been accessed but not altered in a way that left a visible mark. I checked the booking portal, logged in, navigated to the reservation. Everything matched the email. No discrepancies, no flags, no reason to question it. Still, I stayed on the page longer than necessary, scrolling through details I had already memorized. Check-in time, room type, payment status, confirmed, confirmed, confirmed. There was nothing there that suggested a problem, nothing that required action. And yet, when I closed the page, the same quiet misalignment remained. Not louder, not clearer, just present, like something that had shifted slightly out of place and was waiting, not to be noticed, but to be understood later. I stopped asking direct questions after that, not intentionally. It just felt inefficient. Every time I asked something simple, the answer came back slightly misaligned. Not wrong, not clearly evasive, just incomplete in a way that required interpretation. So I adjusted. I started listening instead. A few days before their scheduled check-in, I called to confirm their travel timing. Not as a question, just as a routine step. Something I always did before any arrangement involving other people. My mother answered. I told her I wanted to make sure the driver would be there at the right time. There was a pause. Then she said they might not need the driver. The word might stayed in the air longer than the sentence itself. I asked why. She said they were considering other options. No details, no elaboration. I did not press further. Instead, I asked what time they were planning to arrive. She gave me an answer. It did not match the check-in window I had already shared. Not significantly, just enough to create a gap. I repeated the correct timing. She adjusted her answer immediately, too quickly, as if the first response had not been anchored to anything real. We ended the call shortly after. Again, no mention of the place itself. No acknowledgement of what had been arranged. Only logistics, only fragments. That night, I reviewed the booking again, not because I expected to find something, but because repetition creates clarity. The reservation still showed as confirmed, no visible changes, but this time I noticed something I had overlooked before. The last accessed timestamp, it had been updated, not by me. The system did not show who had accessed it, only that it had been opened through a guest link. The timing matched the day my father had asked about transferring the reservation. I stared at the screen for a while, not reacting, just observing. There was no violation in that. I had sent them the confirmation. They had the right to access it. That was how it was designed. Still, the sequence of events did not settle. First, the question about transfer. then the access, then the vague answers. Individually, each one was explainable. Together, they formed something less clear. The next morning, I received a message from my father, short, direct. He asked if the room included breakfast. I told him yes. He asked if it was for 2 people. I confirmed. Then he asked if additional guests could be added. I read the message twice before responding. It was not the question itself. It was the pattern. Each question moved slightly away from the original intent of the booking. Not toward experiencing it, but toward adjusting its use. I answered carefully. I said additional guests would require prior approval and might involve extra charges. He replied with a single word. Okay. No follow-up, no clarification. The conversation ended there. I did not message again. Later that afternoon, I checked the reservation once more. This time, I navigated deeper into the system, not just the main confirmation page, but the back-end details available through the portal. Logs. Timestamps. Minor entries that most people would never look at. There was a record of a call made to the resort, linked to the booking reference. I had not made that call. The system did not include the content of the conversation, only the time, and the department that handled it, guest services. I leaned back in my chair. There was still no proof of anything specific, no change in names, no cancellation, no modification that altered the structure of the booking. Everything remained intact. But the interaction around it was increasing, quietly, without explanation. That evening, I decided to try something different. Not a confrontation, just observation placed into conversation. I called my mother again, kept my tone neutral. I mentioned the resort casually. Said I hoped they would enjoy the view. There was a brief silence. Then she said, yes. Nothing more, no description, no anticipation. No reference to anything I had arranged, just acknowledgement, flat, contained. As if the subject itself did not exist beyond the word, I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I asked what they were most looking forward to. It was a simple question. Open, non-specific, she answered after a delay. We'll see when we get there. The sentence was complete, but it did not connect to anything. It did not reflect planning or interest or even uncertainty. It felt like a placeholder, something used to close a gap without filling it. I ended the call soon after. Not abruptly, just naturally, when the conversation no longer held anything. That night, I did not check the booking again, for the first time since I had made it, not because I trusted it, but because I was beginning to understand something else. The system itself was not the problem. The booking was intact. The structure was correct. Everything I had done was precise. The issue was not in the process. It was in how the process was being used. And for the first time, I considered the possibility that what I had arranged was no longer being used for the reason I intended. I did not react to that thought. I did not follow it to a conclusion. I just let it exist, quietly, the same way everything else had always existed in that space between us, unspoken, unconfirmed, but no longer invisible. I waited until the day before their check-in, not because I needed more information, but because timing matters. If something is wrong, it reveals itself more clearly when it is closer to becoming irreversible. That morning, I sent a message. Simple, direct. I asked what time they planned to leave for the resort. No extra words, no tone attached, just the question. It took longer than usual for a response. When it came, it was from my father. We're still deciding. I read it once, then again. The phrasing did not match the situation. There was nothing left to decide. Transport had been arranged. Dates were fixed. Everything had already been confirmed. Still, I responded calmly. I reminded him that the driver was scheduled based on their original timing and any changes would need to be updated. A few minutes passed, then another message. We might not go tomorrow. There was no explanation, no context, just the statement. I stared at the screen, not surprised, but not aligned with it either. I asked why. There was a delay. Longer this time. When he replied, the message had changed tone. "Why are you asking so many questions?" I did not respond immediately. I read it carefully. There was nothing aggressive in the wording, but the shift was clear. The focus had moved, not on the trip, not on the plan, but on me. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Then I sent something neutral. "I just need to update the booking if anything changes." No accusation, no pressure, just a fact. He responded quickly this time. "There's no need. We'll handle it." Handle it. The words settled in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not because of what they meant, but because of what they implied. I had already handled it. That was the structure. That was the agreement, even if it had never been spoken. I did not challenge it. I simply acknowledged the message and ended the conversation. A few hours later, my mother called. Her tone was different, softer, but not warmer. There was a carefulness in the way she spoke, as if each word had been placed before it was said. She told me I should not worry so much, that I was overthinking things. I listened without interrupting. She continued, said that I had a tendency to control situations too tightly, that not everything needed to be managed. The words were familiar, not in content, but in structure, a redirection, a quiet shift of responsibility. I let her finish. Then I said calmly that I only wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. There was a pause. Then she responded almost immediately. "It will, you don't need to interfere." Interfere. The word stayed longer than the rest. I repeated it silently, not questioning it, just placing it next to everything else that had been said. I asked one more question, not about the trip, about something small. I asked if they had received the full itinerary. She said yes. I asked if everything was clear. She said yes again. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Everything, according to her, was understood, complete. There was nothing left to discuss. The conversation ended shortly after. I did not call back. I did not send another message. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into the booking system, reviewed the reservation again, still confirmed, still unchanged. But this time I looked at it differently, not as something I had created, but as something I was no longer part of. The access logs showed another entry, recent. Within the last hour, someone had opened the booking again. Guest link. Same as before. I checked the contact details, still my email, still my phone number. No modifications, everything remained technically correct. And yet I had been removed from the process in every other way, not formally, not explicitly, but functionally. Decisions were being made without me. Questions were being redirected. Information was being withheld, then reframed as unnecessary. I closed the system, sat back. There was a moment where I could have pushed further, called again. Asked directly, demanded clarity, but I did not, because I recognized the pattern, not from this situation alone, but from years of smaller moments that followed the same structure. When something became uncomfortable, it was not addressed, it was redirected, reframed, assigned a different meaning, until the original concern no longer had a place to exist, and if it persisted, it became the problem, not the situation, the person observing it. I understood that now, clearly. So I stopped asking, not because I was satisfied, but because the answers were no longer where the questions were being directed. That night, I did not check the booking again. I did not need to. For the first time, the system felt secondary, because whatever was happening, it was no longer contained within it. It had moved somewhere else, somewhere quieter, less visible, but far more deliberate. And I knew, without needing confirmation, that by the time the reservation date arrived, whatever truth existed behind all of this would no longer be something they could adjust, or explain away, or return to silence. I did not contact them the next day. The check-in day, I let it pass without interruption. No message, no reminder, no confirmation. If they were going, they would go. If they were not, the system would reflect it. That was enough. I went through my morning the same way I always did. Emails, responses, small tasks completed in order. Nothing left open. By midday, there was still no communication from them. Not unusual. Silence had always been the default. Still, I noticed it. Not because I expected an update, but because of everything that had led to this point. Around 2:10 p.m., I logged into the booking portal. Check-in time had already opened. The reservation status had changed, from confirmed to checked in. I looked at it without reacting, just reading the words as they were. No delay, no uncertainty. The system was clear. The room had been occupied. I checked the timestamp. 12:47 p.m., early check-in, approved. I had not requested that. I had not been informed. I moved to the guest details section. Names unchanged, still my parents. No additional guests listed, no visible discrepancies. Everything on the surface remained aligned. I closed the portal, then opened it again. Not to find something new, but to confirm that what I saw did not shift. It didn't. The status remained the same. Checked in. I picked up my phone, not to call them, but to call the resort. The number was in the confirmation email. I dialed it once. Let it ring. When the receptionist answered, her tone was practiced, professional, neutral. I gave her the booking reference. She asked me to hold. There was a pause, soft music in the background, then she returned. "Yes, sir, the guests have already checked in." Her voice carried no hesitation. No uncertainty, just confirmation. I asked calmly what time they had arrived. She repeated the timestamp I had already seen. 12:47 p.m. I thanked her. I was about to end the call, but something stopped me. Not a thought, just a pause that extended slightly longer than necessary. Then I asked one more question. "Can you confirm the number of guests?" There was a brief silence, not long but noticeable. Then she answered, "2 guests, sir." That aligned. Technically, I nodded even though she could not see it. Then I asked something else, carefully, without emphasis. "Were the names verified at check-in?" Another pause, this one slightly longer. "Yes, sir, identification was provided." I closed my eyes for a moment, not in frustration, just to remove everything except the information. Then I asked the final question, the one that did not fully belong but needed to be placed somewhere. "Can you confirm the names used at the front desk?" There was a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible. Her tone remained professional. But the space between her words changed. "Sir, for privacy reasons, I cannot disclose full guest details." I expected that. I did not push. Instead, I adjusted. "Of course, I understand. I'm just confirming that the reservation was used by the intended guests." Another pause, longer now. I could hear faint typing, a cursor moving through a system I could not see. Then she spoke again, more carefully this time. "Sir." The reservation was checked in using the booking reference and valid identification. She stopped there, did not complete the thought, did not confirm what I had asked. I did not repeat the question. I let the silence settle. Then I thanked her and ended the call. I placed the phone down, sat still. There was no immediate reaction, no anger, no need to confront because something had already shifted, not emotionally, structurally. The system had confirmed usage. The staff had confirmed presence. But the answers around identity were no longer direct. I opened my laptop again, returned to the booking, scrolled through the details. Everything remained intact. No visible changes, no flags, no alerts, but I knew now that what was recorded and what had actually happened were not perfectly aligned. Later that evening, I received a notification. A charge confirmation, room service, signed to the room, time-stamped. I looked at the items, 2 meals, wine, dessert. The kind of order that matches a celebration. Anniversary package. Used, consumed, completed, exactly as designed, except for one detail. I had not heard from them, not before check-in, not after, no message, no acknowledgement. Nothing to indicate they were there or that they had arrived or that the stay was happening at all. I did not contact them, not yet. Instead, I opened the resort's general information page, scrolled through policies, terms, conditions. There was a section on guest verification. Identification required at check-in. Names must match reservation, exceptions only under specific authorization. I read it slowly, carefully. Then I closed the page and sat back. At that point, the truth was no longer hidden. It was just incomplete. And it was no longer a question of whether something had happened, but how much of it had been arranged before I was ever aware of it. I looked at the time, then at my phone. Still no message. No missed call. Nothing, just silence. Consistent, unchanged, the same silence I had always known. But now it carried something else inside it, not absence, not distance, but intention. And for the first time, I did not try to fill it. I let it remain exactly as it was, because whatever was unfolding was no longer something they could keep contained. Not within words, not within explanations, and not within the version of events they had already started to construct. The system had begun recording it, quietly, precisely, without interpretation. And I understood that I did not need to confront anything yet. I only needed to keep watching. Because the more they tried to control the narrative, the more the details would begin to separate from it. And once that happened, the truth would not need to be forced. It would just remain, unavoidable, documented, and impossible to return. I waited until the second night of the booking before I said anything. Not because I needed more proof, but because patterns reveal themselves more clearly over time. One action can be explained, two can be adjusted, but repetition becomes structure. By then, the room had already been used for over 24 hours. Charges had continued. Another notification came through that morning. Breakfast, 2 people, signed to the same room. I noted the time. 8:12 a.m., consistent, routine. As if whoever was there had settled into the stay without interruption. Without hesitation, without the weight of explaining anything. I opened my messages, scrolled to my father's name, typed a single sentence. "Did you reach safely?" I read it once, then sent it. There was no immediate response. I expected that. Time passed, an hour, then 2. At 11:37 a.m., a reply came. "Yes." Nothing else, no mention of the place, no detail, no acknowledgement of the stay itself, just the answer, closed, contained. I stared at it for a moment, then typed again. "How is the room?" This time the response came faster. "Fine." One word, no description, no expansion. I placed the phone down. There was no need to continue the exchange in that direction. It would not produce anything different. So I changed the angle. I called instead. He answered after a few rings. His voice sounded normal, not strained, not distracted, just steady. I asked if everything was comfortable. He said yes. I asked if the view was good. He paused, not long, but long enough to notice. Then he said, "It's okay." I looked at the floor, not reacting to the words but to the absence behind them. An ocean view resort does not produce okay. Not unless it is not being seen, or not being experienced, or not being described truthfully. I asked if they had gone to the dinner that was included in the package. Another pause, slightly longer this time. Then "We'll see." The same phrase my mother had used days earlier, unchanged, as if it had been agreed upon. Or repeated, or practiced. I did not challenge it. Instead, I said something simple. "The reservation shows check-in yesterday at 12:47. There was silence on the line, not immediate, but expanding, filling the space between us in a way that felt heavier than before. Then he spoke. "Yes." No elaboration, no explanation, just confirmation. I nodded to myself. Then asked the question that mattered. "Did you use the original identification?" There was a shift, subtle, but unmistakable. His tone changed, not louder, not defensive in a direct way, just firmer. "Why does that matter?" I did not answer immediately. I let the question sit, not to create tension, but to observe what came after it. He continued, "You're asking unnecessary things." The pattern had returned. Redirection, reframing, positioning the question as the problem. I spoke calmly. "It matters because the booking requires it." A pause, then a short exhale on his end, barely audible. "But present, we handled it." The same phrase as before, unchanged, closed. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the screen of my laptop, still open to the reservation details. Everything remained consistent. Everything remained technically correct. And yet nothing aligned. I asked one final question, not louder, not sharper, just placed. "Who checked in?" There was no immediate response. The silence that followed was different from the others, not empty, not uncertain, but deliberate. As if something was being measured, then he spoke. "We did." The answer came too quickly, too clean, without the hesitation that had preceded it, and that more than anything else made it incomplete. I did not respond. I let the silence return. Then I said quietly, "Okay," and ended the call. I did not call back. I did not send another message. Instead, I opened the booking system again, navigated deeper than before, past the visible details, into the sections that recorded interaction history. There was another entry, a note attached to the check-in, internal, not fully visible, but partially accessible. It referenced a manual override, authorization granted, guest verification adjusted. I read it twice. Then a third time. The wording was careful, non-specific, but clear enough. The standard process had not been followed. Something had been allowed, approved, modified, not by error, by decision. I scrolled further. There was a staff ID attached, a timestamp, a record of who had processed the check-in. I wrote it down, not on the system, on paper, separate, unalterable. Then I checked the billing details again, more charges, lunch, 2 people, wine, again, consistent with the previous day, a pattern of use, not random, not tentative, but settled. As if whoever was there had no concern about being questioned, or identified, or corrected. I closed the laptop, sat in silence. There was no confusion left. Only structure. They had not just used the booking, they had facilitated its use, adjusted it, allowed it to pass through a system that required precision by introducing something that bypassed it. And they had done it without informing me, without involving me, without acknowledging that the structure I had created was being repurposed. I picked up my phone again, opened the message thread, scrolled through the short responses. Yes, fine, we handled it, each one complete on its own, but empty when placed next to the reality that was unfolding. I did not confront them, not yet, because the more they spoke, the more the gaps widened. And in those gaps, the truth was becoming clearer, not through what they said, but through what no longer matched. I looked at the time, then at the reservation, still active, still in use, still recording everything. And I understood that whatever they had arranged was still happening, still ongoing, still leaving traces. And the longer it continued, the harder it would be for them to return to a version of events that did not include everything I was already seeing. So I did nothing. I did not interrupt it. I did not stop it. I let it continue. Because sometimes, the only way to understand the full shape of something is to let it complete itself, without interference, without warning, without giving it a chance to correct itself before it reveals exactly what it is. By the third day, I stopped checking for confirmation, not because I had everything I needed, but because there was nothing left to question. The structure was complete. The booking had been used. The process had been bypassed. The answers I received no longer attempted to align with the reality being recorded. Everything existed in parallel now, what they said, and what had actually happened. I woke up earlier than usual that morning. No alarm, no reason tied to routine, just awareness. The kind that settles in when something has already reached its conclusion, even if it has not formally ended. I did not open my laptop immediately. I sat in the quiet, let the stillness remain undisturbed. There was no urgency, no need to verify, because for the first time I trusted what I already knew, not emotionally, not reactively, but structurally. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the messages again, short responses, closed statements, no expansion, no acknowledgement. It was not just avoidance, it was design. Every word placed in a way that prevented continuation, prevented exposure, prevented anything that required consistency. I set the phone down. Then, slowly, I opened the billing summary from the resort. The final charges had begun to compile. Dinner from the previous night, 2 guests, premium selections, dessert, wine, all aligned with the anniversary package. Used, consumed, completed, exactly as intended. Except for one detail that no longer required confirmation. It had not been them. Not in the way it was supposed to be. Not in the way it had been given. I did not feel anger. That would have required surprise or violation. But this felt older than that. Familiar in a way I had not named before. Not the act itself, but the pattern behind it. Something given being redirected. Something structured being adjusted without acknowledgement. Something clear. Being reframed until it no longer belonged to the person who created it. I stood up, walked to the window, looked outside without focusing on anything specific. There was no scene to absorb, no distraction, just space. And in that space, I began to understand something that had been present for years, but never fully assembled. This was not a single event, not an isolated decision. It was a continuation, a quieter version of something that had always existed between us. The difference now was that it had been documented, recorded, placed into a system that did not adjust itself to maintain comfort. It simply reflected what had occurred, without interpretation, without protection, without silence. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, navigated back to the reservation one final time. The status had changed again. Checked out. Timestamp 11:02 a.m. The stay was over, completed, closed. I scrolled through the full summary, every charge, every timestamp, every recorded interaction, nothing missing, nothing unclear, just a complete sequence of events that existed independently of anything they had said. I exported the invoice, saved it, then downloaded the interaction log, what I could access of it, saved that too, not as evidence for confrontation, not for leverage, just to preserve it, because I understood now that once something like this is acknowledged out loud, it begins to shift, to reshape itself, to be explained, reframed, adjusted, and I did not want that. I did not want a version of this that could be softened or denied or turned into something smaller than what it was. I wanted it exactly as it had happened, unaltered, uninterpreted, final. I closed the laptop, then picked up my phone, opened the message thread again. For a moment, I considered asking directly, not aggressively, just clearly. Who used the room? Why was the process overridden? What exactly had been arranged? The questions were simple. The answers, theoretically, could be too. But I already knew they would not be. They would be redirected, diluted, positioned in a way that shifted focus away from the act and toward the act of questioning it. And I had no interest in that anymore, so I did something else. I typed a message. Not a question, not an accusation, just a statement. I saw the check-out confirmation. Hope everything went smoothly. I read it once, then sent it. There was no reply. Not immediately. Not after an hour, not after 2. The silence returned, familiar, consistent, but now fully understood. I placed the phone down, and for the first time since this began, I did not feel the need to wait for a response. Because whatever answer could have been given was already smaller than what had been done. And I no longer needed it, not to confirm, not to clarify, not to complete anything. The situation had already reached its final shape, not through confrontation, Not through admission, but through the quiet accumulation of facts that no longer depended on anyone acknowledging them. I sat back in my chair, hands still, mind clear, and accepted something that did not require emotion to understand, that what had been taken was never just the stay. It was the assumption that what I gave would remain what I intended it to be. And that assumption was the only thing that had truly changed. Everything else had simply followed its pattern, uninterrupted. Until it could no longer be ignored. The silence lasted longer this time. Not hours, days, no message, no follow-up. No attempt to continue the conversation I had ended with something simple and neutral. I saw the check-out confirmation, hope everything went smoothly. It remained there, delivered, read, unanswered. I did not send anything else. There was nothing left to ask, and more importantly, nothing left that required their version of events. By the second day after checkout, the financial summary finalized. The full invoice was processed, charges settled, payment confirmed, everything closed within the system. I opened the document again, not to review it but to observe it in its completed state. Every item listed in order: arrival, meals, services, departure. A full timeline of presence, structured, precise, unaffected by explanation. I printed a copy, not because I needed it physically, but because paper does not change. It does not update. It does not adjust itself to match a narrative later introduced. It remains exactly as it was at the moment it was created. I placed it in a folder, closed it, set it aside. Later that afternoon, I received a call, my mother. I let it ring once, then answered. Her voice was calm, normal, as if nothing had occurred. She asked how I was. I answered, short, direct. Then she said they had returned home safely. The sentence was placed carefully. Not as information, but as a replacement. Something to occupy the space where other details should have been. I acknowledged it, then let the silence extend. She did not fill it immediately. There was a pause. Then she asked if I had been busy. I said yes. Another pause. Then she added almost casually, the trip was fine. Fine, the same word, reused, contained. I did not respond to it, not directly. Instead, I asked something else. Did everything match the booking? The question was simple, neutral. But it did not belong in the structure she was maintaining. There was a delay, not long, but enough. Then she said, yes, everything was okay. I closed my eyes briefly, not in frustration, just in recognition. The alignment they were maintaining, it was deliberate, consistent, even now, even after everything had been completed. I opened my eyes, then said calmly, I have the full record from the resort. There was no immediate response. The silence that followed was different from the others, not casual. Not empty, but weighted. Then she spoke. What do you mean? The tone had shifted, not sharply, but enough to reveal awareness. I did not raise my voice. I did not change my pace. I mean the check and details, the billing, the internal notes. I let the words sit, unforced, unlayered, just information. There was a longer pause this time, then she exhaled, soft, barely audible. You're making this into something unnecessary. The pattern, one final time, reframing, minimizing. Positioning the observation as the issue, not the act. I did not interrupt her. She continued. It was just a stay, nothing complicated. Just a stay. I looked at the folder on my desk, closed, complete, unchanged. Then I said something I had not said before, not as a question, not as an accusation, just a statement placed into the space between us. It was transferred. The silence that followed was immediate, complete. There was no attempt to respond right away, no correction, no denial. Just absence, and in that absence everything aligned, not through confirmation, but through what could no longer be said. After a few seconds she spoke again. Her voice was quieter now, more controlled. We didn't think it would matter. I did not respond, because that sentence contained everything. Not just the action, but the reasoning, the assumption, the pattern. I let the silence remain. Then, without adding anything else, I said, okay. and ended the call. I did not wait for a reply. I did not expect one, because consequences had already begun, not loud, not visible, but structural. Their version of events no longer held, not even between us, because once something is acknowledged, even indirectly, it cannot return to being undefined. I did not need to confront further. I did not need to explain impact or describe what had been lost. The system had already done that, quietly, completely, without emotion, and now so had they. In the only way that mattered, by no longer being able to maintain the silence that had protected it. I sat back in my chair, the room still, the folder untouched, and understood that the outcome was already in place, not as punishment, not as resolution, but as something simpler, the removal of alignment between what was given and what was done with it. And once that alignment is gone, it does not return, not through words, not through time, not through anything that can be offered after the fact. Just remains absent, permanent, uncorrected, and quietly final. Nothing changed after that, not in any visible way. There were no follow-up conversations, no attempt to revisit what had been said, no correction, no apology. The subject simply stopped existing in our conversations, replaced by smaller things, daily details, practical questions, the same structure that had always been there. Only now I could see it clearly, not as absence but as design. I adjusted without announcing it. Not outwardly, not in a way that required acknowledgement, just internally. I stopped initiating anything that required trust, no arrangements, no planning, no handling of things that could be redirected. If something needed to be done, I did it for myself. If something involved them, I kept it minimal, contained, defined. There was no confrontation, no distance that could be pointed to. From the outside, everything remained the same. Calls still happened. Messages still exchanged. Nothing was visibly broken, but the structure underneath had shifted. Permanently. I still followed my routine, still checked confirmations, still completed processes the same way I always had. But I no longer attached intention to what I gave. No expectation that it would remain intact. No assumption that it would be used as designed, just the action itself and nothing beyond it. The folder stayed where I placed it, closed, untouched, not hidden, not displayed, just present. Like everything else that had been understood but not spoken. Sometimes I would think about the room, the view I had selected, the details I had checked, not with regret, not even with disappointment, just as something that had existed once in a specific form and then didn't. And that was all. There was no moment of realization for them, no visible consequence that unfolded in front of me, no acknowledgement that carried weight, only that single sentence. We didn't think it would matter. It stayed where it had been placed, uncorrected, unexpanded, final, and over time it became enough, not because it resolved anything, but because it explained everything. I did not revisit it again, not in conversation, not in thought that needed to be completed. It had already reached its end, quietly, without emphasis, exactly the way everything else between us always had. Only this time I understood it before it disappeared.